All right, no, that's perfect. Thank you very much, Qcobani. Let me
Fantastic.
just turn on my camera quickly.
Sure.
Where is that? There we go. Hey everyone, thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate that you took time out of your busy schedules to be here with us today, and for embracing us with your presence in general. So today I'll be doing something that is, I'll just be reflecting on my book chapter that I've been working on. Um, and it's on teaching anthropology in the period of decolonialism specifically, and some of the practical approaches that we've taken as a department and with some colleagues at the at UNISA, at the Department of Anthropology and Archaeology, to try and teach what is somewhat what we think might be a decolonial or a decolonized a module, both in post and in undergrad. So what I'm going to do is I will just reflect on a few abstract points that I had made on the book chapter and just get into them as we go and go and go. So the term decolonizing the curriculum is of significant value and currency, and somewhat fashionable in higher education in South Africa and local student movement at these institutions. So my chapter seeks to give a very brief history and context for why this is fundamental for academic institutions and how we can practically bring about change to teaching the curriculum, specifically anthropology, in the current context. So what I've tried to do is I've tried to introduce the readers to some of the ideas that we think might work, because we've been faced with questions for several years by colleagues and other comrades as to, but how do you think that you'll be able to do it? So how do you go and you decolonize? And you will start noticing that to an extent, some people are asking this very question, not so that they can learn, but so that they can try and catch people out. So I believe that we've been able to offer some of the answers as to, or I've been able to offer some of the answers as to how you are able to answer and say, this is practically a way that we've done it and how we've moved away from those notions of how to teach anthropology specifically in the context that we're currently using. So in the wake of the student protest, specifically Fees Must Fall and Rose Must Fall, students have continuously come out and said that you need to decolonize the curriculum, you need to decolonize education, you need to move away from Eurocentric ideas of what specifically is supposed to be taught and how it's supposed to be taught. Yet we still find ourselves in a tricky situation where colleagues still ask questions like, but why do these students think that it's important for us to move away or to decolonize the institution and to decolonize specifically the curriculum? With those questions, now you start asking yourself, do colleagues specifically, and I'm going to use specifically professors in modules, do they really want to decolonize or move away Africanized, Pan-Africanized, center African ideologies in their teaching? Because for several years, students have been complaining about the same thing. Colleagues have been able to publish and to say this is how you're practically able to move away from these challenges that you're faced with, that students have been complaining with for almost a decade in the context of South Africa specifically, or for just about more than a decade in the context of South Africa specifically. Now, I remember a specific situation where, as Gauteng Anthropology, we had a meeting in one of the universities, and one of the colleagues said that, who do these students think they are? What do they mean that we should decolonize? I cannot be told by a student what to think. And then there, I was like, this is actually what the fundamental problem with what we are currently doing as institutions is. We come around and we believe that we are these beacons of knowledge, yet students still tell us that, but the knowledge that you try to provide to us, the knowledge that you try to teach to us is problematic. This knowledge is removed from our reality. Yet we still have people who try to be so arrogant and yet so stern in their stance that they are not willing to listen to what students are saying. And that's one of the problems of colonial education, this master and student relationship that we have, whereby the master cannot learn from the student. This dichotomy and this relationship between the two is fundamentally problematic, because what it means is that the master does not have space to learn, yet the student has to learn everything. So when you have protests such as roads must fall, when you have protests such as student fees must fall, and students in their memos, they say, but you need to decolonize, you need to Africanize, you need to push Pan-African ideologies in the things that you teach us. This relationship, this Eurocentric thinking of this is how the relationship is supposed to be, stops people from trying to learn from others. And when I'm saying people, I mean the master learning from the student. And when the master is questioned about the ideas of what is supposed to be a curriculum and how you're supposed to teach a curriculum, they become defensive. And we've seen these in multiple cases where specifically, and I always refer back to the professor who struggles to take questions. Why? Because he or she believes that he or she will be caught out. But the reality is that these questions are questions that we as academics specifically are supposed to internalize and to learn from, and then be able to evolve from what we've been teaching for all these years, which is fundamentally problematic, and going throughout history with anthropology specifically, and trying to fix these problems that we have, and developing curriculum and anthropology which is relevant and which contextually belongs to the student. Historically, as we know, anthropology is one of those very problematic modules. Historically, anthropology has been used as a tool to colonize. The anthropologist, and I'll use a specific example of a colleague of mine, a retired colleague of mine, Prof. Chris van Vuren. He says one of the problems was that when he worked for government, they had to send him out into community, into Black communities specifically, so that he can learn about the people. That knowledge was never used for good, but it was used to see how you can influence and how you can take over these people, how you can get people to move from a specific area to another one. So he says, what anthropology stands for and what it has stood for all these years was always that relationship of moving away from your ivory tower, you moving away from your Europe, you moving away from your Americas, and going to study those who are beneath you. And in this context, we are using Africans when I speak of Prof. van Vuren, where you go to these people, you study them, you try to take advantage of their ways, and you try to show them how inferior they are at a later stage so that you can get them to comply to the ideas that you will be putting forward later on. That's just the gist of some of the problematic things that we have come to learn about anthropology. Yes, yet we have this effort or this attempt by us as academics to try and protect a discipline which is fundamentally problematic. This this should be seen as an opportunity by ourselves when students say you need to move away from these ideas, these Eurocentric ideas, which has taken advantage of our ancestors, which have taken advantage of our parents. Move away from these ideologies and ideas and philosophies, and teach us things that will belong to us, things that we can relate to. By not taking these opportunities to decolonize what we are currently teaching, we find ourselves in a situation that we teach education which combats and which fights against the student themselves. And I'm using this within South Africa or in South African universities. That is why I repeat, we have movements such as Roads Must Fall. We will have movements such as Fees Must Fall. So one of the questions that you will perpetually get and continuously get is, why is colonialism problematic? If some of you are on social media, you will notice how a person like Helen Ziller was trying to highlight that colonialism wasn't all bad. And to an extent, you will have your people who will say, but no, colonialism killed people. It enslaved people in their own land. It killed people in their own land. It imprisoned people in their own land. And it continues to do that. It continues to do that until this day and point. Now you find yourself with these two realities and dichotomies of how the world actually is. And from my point of view, from what I've come to acknowledge, is that it is not all bad. I know that that is very problematic when you say that, but it is not all bad, because there are things that you learn from your colonizer that you are able to apply moving forward. One of the problems that we have is that we have this idea that you must be radical in everything that you do. Your approach must be radical. You are either black or white, while we're dismissing that there's a gray area whereby there are some things that you can take which you can use as positives from the negative. So with the legacy of colonialism, I was just giving context to where I'm going right now. So the legacy of colonialism, we know that it's very racist. It holds racist ideology and philosophy. It was practiced in a racist nature. It was practiced in an oppressive nature. It holds Eurocentric thinking as the beacon of thinking, and it rejects Afrocentric thinking. So once you have been able to problematize your enemy, and in this context I'm using Euro and Afrocentric ideologies, once you're able to problematize and to what do you call this, belittle a certain way of learning and a way of knowing, then you are able to take over a people. If anthropology continues to other people and context, then what we will continue to have is we will find ourselves in these problematic practices that we continue to perpetuate if we do not move away from the notions of what is better knowledge and what is not. One of the problems that I think interlinks with this legacy of colonialism and what we continue to see until this day is this idea of what is better knowledge and what is not better knowledge. When students say, but this better knowledge of yours is problematic because it does not relate to me, we want to say, but we want to protect what we know. You've studied for so long, you have a master's, you have a PhD, you have a postdoc, you're a professor and whatnot, and you try to protect all this knowledge that you've accumulated instead of learning from what the students are problematizing. You find yourself in a situation which is quite problematic, because what you then become is you become a part of the problem instead of trying to adjust and to continue learning. We can always see this in situations where more senior people are taught a computer. Because you hold all these titles, because you are well respected, once you are challenged with something as simple for us younger individuals, once you are challenged with something that is as what do you call this, something that is mechanical or technological, you tend to reject it. Not that you don't want to learn from it at times, but because you don't want this thing of people understanding that you are not this body that knows all. That is one of the problems that we have in academia, whereby the beacon of teaching does not want to learn from others, whereby the professor is supposed to be the lecturer is supposed to be this beacon that knows all. But in reality, we all know that is not the reality. That is not the truth. You cannot be one who knows all. So once these ideas of what is a relationship between the two people, specifically the student and the master, what that one can learn from the other, then we'll be able to start moving away from these ideas that everything I teach is correct and cannot be corrected at a later stage. So when I speak of decolonizing the course, I'm just saying that we need to create spaces and resources for a dialogue among all members of the university on how to imagine and envision all cultures and knowledge systems in the curriculum, and with respect to what is being taught and its framework in the world. So basically what I'm saying with that is that this idea that there is superior knowledge, there is superiority in who can teach and how do you teach these knowledges that you teach, becomes problematic because it removes people. It doesn't create a space where other people can use their knowledges and their histories into the conversation, because what it does is that once you try to minimize the effort and the impact that people have done, as we've seen throughout history when coloniality was at its peak, where you have to reduce the people's efforts and attempts at improving themselves to the minimum for you to be able to take over them. What you've done there is that you've removed their knowledge systems, you've removed their knowledges in general, and you are able to overtake these people, and you are able to control these people. In the institution, if we continue with these notions that a certain knowledge, Eurocentric knowledge and Western knowledge, overrides all knowledges, then we will continue to have these spaces which are negative and which are toxic, and we'll continue to have large numbers of students of African descent and African students who struggle with the education that they are faced with, not because that they are the dumbest people. I know that it's not right to say it, or it doesn't sound right to say that, but not because they are dumb. I'll give an example. One of the questions that we always have to engage with is, but how do you decolonize, which I've been addressing for quite a while. But how am I a product of privilege? I grew up in an unprivileged area, and I'm speaking about the white male specifically in this context. I grew up in a poor area. How can I be privileged? Everything that went through does not accumulate to privilege. One of the problems that we have found that we must start to acknowledge actually with these conversations of, but I can't be privileged, is that there is a chance that this person is just not, I'm going to say, not smart enough to understand what you mean, or this person is just blatantly on the path to make sure that they reject everything that they feel is an attack on them. And the movement, specifically the decolonization movement, is not an attack on anyone. It's just people wanting spaces to be created for them to be able to express themselves, for them to be able to exist, for them to be able to bring themselves without being looked at negatively. Yet for people, they feel like, but this is an attack on my knowledge system. No. That's not what it is. The aim is for people to exist in the spaces that you've created, but to bring themselves, and to bring themselves wholly, to bring themselves fully. And those are some of the ideas that these people that I'm saying they do not understand. These are some of the ideas that they try to reject. So I would like to propose that moving forward, people who come with this negative approach, you must just treat them like a child. You know how we've been, which is also very problematic, how you were taught as a student, you were graded and they would say that you are not smart enough, you have to remain grade under. You'll not be able to pass to move into the next, into the next grade. If we take that approach and we apply it, what we'll be able to do is that we'll be able to say, I'm trying to explain this to you as much as I can. You still do not understand. This in this situation means that you are just not smart enough and cannot engage in this conversation. And I'm saying this from a place of frustration, not from a place of of arrogance or anything of that nature. I'm saying this from a place of frustration because scholars for several years have been trying to scholars have been trying to teach, and decolonial scholars and Pan-African scholars, Afrocentric scholars have been trying to do this for several years where they're trying to teach, yet people come with these notions of, but no, I do not understand. If that's the case, then you should start treating people with the attitude that they bring and say, okay, then you cannot go to a grade above in terms of me having any further intellectual conversation with you. So that I believe that it's very important, and it's very frustrating because it has held back the ideas of what can be taught and what cannot be taught. What can we speak about? What can students protest about, and what cannot be protested about? So African students come to universities to learn about subjects that they are interested in, and look to the academic to be the expert on this. So you have a very much, what you have is that you have a power dynamic that they have encountered in primary and in high school, and that they are very comfortable with. This relationship, this power dynamic that we have here, is what is causing some of the problems that we tend to engage or that we find ourselves in with modern ways of or what we call Western ways of knowing, whereby you have students coming to learn, and there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is that we must be able and we must be willing to be open ourselves to this conversation of allowing students to express themselves and existing in these spaces. So what happens when they become aware of a lack of visibility of their plural voices, or of the people like them as having contributed to the subject, or might have a different narrative to the story being told? What happens to the student when they do not hear their voices at all, or when they do, it is glossed over or framed in a negative light? You know what happens when all these questions are answered, or when we see these questions start to come up to a student's mind, or to students who've been questioning the system that we've come to introduce or we've come to teach. What happens is that you have protests. Students start to say, but you have not been listening to us. We've been problematizing this issue, yet you've removed yourself from this engagement. You've decided to say we are mad. So what's the best solution for us? We are going to protest because that's the only way we know how to exist. The same thing that we see with understanding protest in the township. The people come and say, and I'm not politicizing the discussion, I'm just moving to the engagements that you have with people in the township. They say, but we've been raising issues. We've been complaining about service delivery. We've been complaining that a certain part of the township is just not functional. We need government or municipality interventions. Yet nothing has happened. So what do? To get their attention, we are going to protest. We are going to ban things, because once something is not banned, then there is no reaction. You will only get a reaction once you have done something so drastic, which is what is problematic about this way of dichotomous thinking and this way of hierarchical thinking of power and the servant. What it does is that the one at the top fails to understand the one at the bottom has an actual input. The one at the bottom has an actual input that they are actually making, which makes sense. They do not acknowledge these people because they cannot be on the same level as them. So what do they end up doing? They end up protesting so that you will hear them by force. And that's the most logical step for them in that situation. If you remove content which is relevant to your student, to the student specifically, content which is only focused on your ways of knowing, on your ways of existing, on the knowledge that puts you in the position that you are, you only focus on that knowledge, and you're not trying to understand why students have been problematizing this issue. What you have is, you have roads must fall, you have fees must fall, you have protests that are bound to happen. So I've problematized the nature of the relationship that we have as specifically as the teacher and the student, as the professor and as the master and the learner. I've problematized it. So now I am going to suggest some of the ways that we have been attempting to work and resolve these issues that have been raised by students. I will try to give you a contextual understanding of the effort that we've made as an institution to try and listen, and not just listen, but move away from these notions of, so what can be done, so what must be done, which as I've already indicated, are very problematic. That arrogant approach is very problematic, especially in the discipline of anthropology, because Himali Joshi from UJ, she did something brilliant a few years ago. She made us watch Avatar. Before I jump into what I'm about to jump into now. She made us watch Avatar for the honors level. And she said, what is problematic with Avatar? Avatar showed us the role of the anthropologist in colonialization, in people being, in people being killed, in genocides, the what we do as anthropologists, the roles that we play as anthropologists. When we go out, we learn about the people, and then you give back to to your superpower, to the master. You teach these people, you tell these people about the ways of being of these people, how they exist, where they get their power from, and then the superpower is able to come back and to colonize or to take over the resources that they are looking for. That until this day has played in my mind about some of the issues that we have which are problematic about this anthropological research that we continue to do until this day, whereby you do not go to Europe to study their problems, because no one can tell you that they are not problematic. They do not have their own problems. No one can tell you that Europe is not fundamentally problematic in its approach to whether it's racism, whether it's them colonizing people, whether it's them still until this day benefiting from Africa and African resources, having this unequal relationship of trade that benefits them more than it benefits the African. No one can tell you that it's not problematic, So if we do not go and study them, what makes us think that it's okay for them to come and study us as Africans in this situation and in this context? The reason why this is because we do not see what we are going to benefit from the European or from the West, yet they know all the tricks of benefiting from a continent, the dark continent, the continent that is seen as suffering as much as we currently do. That problem is the problem that students have been trying to highlight to us about not just anthropology in theory, but anthropology in practice. Our ways of doing things and going to collect content, which at times, which is problematic when you start to speak about things like, what do you call this? Going to the mountain, that the entire process of initiation and whatnot. Because what that does is that it does not come, when the researcher goes there, does not come back and speak about it in glorified tones, but comes back and problematizes and speaks negatively of these initiation processes. And I'm not going to lie, I believe that I'm a realist. There are some processes or practices that are fundamentally problematic. This is one of the problems with this dichotomous thinking that I keep going back and forth with, the idea that something can only be good and not be bad. There are practices, traditional and cultural practices, that should be problematized. But now the problem is when you go there and you study them with the eye of making them problematic and negative. That is what students have been saying, but this anthropological research just goes there to not learn from people, but to take from people, and still it portrays these people as what do you call this? As subhuman beings that do barbaric acts, So going to this point of, so what can be done? What can we do? What we have tried to do is we've tried to encourage critical thinking within students. I know we believe that we encourage critical thinking in all institutions, but if you think about it, you encourage at times you find yourself encouraging critical thinking within a box or within a set of ideas. The student cannot move away from these problematic notions from these notions that you've presented to them. You say that to them, think critically, but within a set, or I'll give you a set of tools. You cannot break down a system if the tools that you are using are the same tools that we use to build the system. If you encourage critical thinking, you should be able to say to the student, these ideas, I've shown you how problematic they are. We try to give you a colleague of mine, Stefan, I'm going to speak about specifically our honors module. Stefan, what he does, and he does so brilliantly, is presenting these ideas of what anthropology is, what we've taught for all these years, what is acceptable, what we see as acceptable within anthropology. And then we move on from there and we start to problematize these notions. We start to problematize why this these ideas. We are not removing the student entirely from what is known as anthropology or what was known as anthropology, but what we are doing is that we are giving them these set of tools that I was speaking about, but then we give them other tools to see why it is problematic, these notions of what we regard as anthropology. And then we move on from there and we try to give them practical ways that they can introduce an anthropology that is relevant for them, for us to be able to build a curriculum that is relevant not just to us as teachers or as academic, but that is relevant to the student, that the student can relate to. A friend of mine has always had this thing where he says, throughout my years, he studied commerce at the University of Johannesburg. He studied retail, actually. He says, he's been saying throughout the years, one of the things that I've always found problematic about what I've been learning for all these years is that I learned in my undergrad is I always had to learn about mass mart. I had to learn about like these big American corporates. When I went to start practice, none of these things could actually speak to each other. They just couldn't relate to each other, because what I had to practice within a South African context couldn't relate back to that, to what I was given in theory. That comes back to what I'm speaking about now, whereby we should be able to not just give you a gap where we give you this Western education, we teach you how anthropology or what anthropology is, and not try to problematize it before we give you the solution, what we believe is the solution, what we, after listening to students, believe might be the solution to solving this problem that we've raised at the start is. So if you're able to give the theoretical background, the same global and Western theoretical background, and you're able to give why it's problematic to study that instead of studying ShopRite, instead of studying, South African brands or South African corporate, and then going into practice, you basically skipped a step, So what we have tried to do is that we have tried to give students this ability to understand that this is what we have learned, and not make them disabled within, and I'm sorry for using the word disabled, within a functioning world. But we are trying to give them the tools for them to be able to understand why the way that you practice what you've been practicing is problematic, and why it is problematic, and how you could practice or understand this context once you've moved away from these problematic ways of existing in the world. So that is our approach to what we regard as something that is Africa-centered, because it encourages the student to think outside of what has always been problematic, what we've been problematizing for years. And why it's important that we are cognizant of the fact that it's not just anthropology which is a problem, but anthropology has had a huge role, has played a huge role in how people exist in modern days, or or other curriculums that have also had a role to play in that. But anthropology, because of its othering nature and how it exists in this world, because of that. Sorry?
We lost you for a second, but we can see you now.
Oh, you lost me. Oh, sorry. I don't know where you lost me.
It was literally 3 seconds, but we can hear you now.
All right. No, that's perfect. All right. So I think the last thing that I will touch on, because I've been speaking for quite a while right now, is how in practice you should be able to remove not just the student, but you should be able to remove yourself from these ways of centering what we continue to see as problematic, not just in theory, but in practice. We should be able to say, as an academic, as a teacher, you should be able to say, I am willing to learn. You should be able to listen for you to be able to practice. Because one of the problems is that this all-knowing, at the top beacon of knowledge cannot know everything. And once that beacon of knowledge, that big mind does not know things that he or she is being challenged with, they tend to become defensive. when you are in the fence, there's no one who's going to benefit from that relationship between you as the teacher and the student. So it's important that we are able to go back, we go back and we learn for us to be able to apply. Not just that, but we should be able to teach content which is relevant and not try to problematize everything that is brought your way. I'm not saying every single thing is applicable, but I'm saying that you should be able to, you know, like you should be able to say, but this is relevant, this is teachable, this works. And the only way to be able to do that is for you to be able to listen. I think I'll stop there, and then we can just have a chat because I've been speaking for too long now. And yeah, I think I've used my notes. So one thing that I'll say is that this is not everything that I've worked with. These are just this is just a holistic approach to what I've been working on through over the last few months, or in terms of trying to write this book chapter and whatnot. So yeah, I think we can just have a quick chat, and we can what do you call this? We can engage. We can engage. You know, I don't know things, so this problematic thing of trying to ask people everything, it just doesn't work. All right. Thank you very much, colleagues. I'll just keep quiet for a while, and then we can just take a few questions, and then yeah, and answers.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Paseka. That was so rich. And I think anyone who's gone through South African Anthropology department can certainly relate to a lot of the things that you are thinking through. And I think already there's so much engagement in the chat session. And I think it's showing how many people relate to what you were saying. So we're going to open up to question and answer. For those people who are new to the platform, so right at the bottom, there's three sort of emojis, and one looks like a person who's raising their hand. So if you click there, that will send a signal to us that you have a question. But in the meantime, whilst I'm giving people a chance to respond, I just want to read you some of the comments that have been left for you already. So Hemali had to leave a little bit early, but she wrote, Paseka, thank you for your valuable insights. I think, quote unquote, who is in this room is a testament to who is participating in this conversation, but where is everyone else? Also, she continues, I think spaces for this conversation are important, but not just any space. Brave spaces are necessary where anyone feels like they can voice and participate in this conversation. And she continued to say that she wishes she could have stayed longer, but unfortunately she has another meeting and she needs to leave sooner, but she will listen to the recording, and she thinks that sessions like this are unnecessary. And then there was a comment from Luvuyo who said that he agrees with you, that anthropology continues to be used for cultural appropriation. And then Mahlobo, who I believe is Jabu, made a comment around the concept of studying anyone itself as being absurd, for it enforces the superiority English, superiority complex. Folks, is there anyone with a question? Feel free to raise your hand, and then we'll be able to go to you. Okay, Stefan, I see you, but let's take three. There's one more. And then is there anyone else? Okay, we can go to Stefan so long. Stefan, over to you.
Hi, Paseka, and hi to everyone else. I am the Stefan that Paseka referred to earlier. Paseka, I have one small comment and question for you, but then I also have, I guess, a question for the bigger group. And Paseka, I like that you emphasized listening several times throughout your presentation, which I think you're suggesting this is a core technique for us to appreciate in how we think about how we put our curriculum together and how we think forward. My question to you is whether or not you can maybe elaborate a little bit more on it in terms of what does listening mean in practice? How do we listen? Can you speak to that? A small question. And to the bigger group, I think Paseka touched on critical thinking, which I think is important. He was making a point that sometimes we say critical thinking is important, but the ways in which we cultivate it is not always quite what one would like. I would like to maybe ask the bigger group how do they go about cultivating critical thinking in the courses that they teach. I think this is something that I'm very interested in learning from, and I'm sure that I don't want to speak for Paseka, but I'm pretty sure Paseka would also be interested to hear more. Thank you.
Fantastic. Let's go to Zianda. Dr. Machombozi.
Hi, everyone, and hi, Paseka. Thank you so much for such an engaging presentation. And I must say that I share all of your frustrations with regards to just anthropology and how it's being taught, but not just anthropology, but lots of the social sciences. But the question, I have two questions for you as well. One is related to the one that Stefan just asked about listening. But I'm asking, you mentioned this idea of not wanting to be these people who, you go into the classroom, you're the teacher, and you treat your students as if they don't know anything, and you are the bearer of all the knowledge, and everyone must listen to you. And I agree that that is a terrible way of teaching, but I'm really interested in what are some of the practical ways, the strategies, the techniques that you use in practice for your students to feel heard, and for you to show your students that not only are you teaching them, but you're also learning from them. So what are some of the practical ways one can do that, and what does it look like in your classroom? So that's the teaching practice type of question. And then the other question, more on the topic of sort of like thinking about anthropology and decolonizing anthropology. And I think this is a frustration we all share in the discipline, and even more frustrating is that it's a conversation that's been ongoing for a very, very, very long time. And I'm wondering, not now about teaching, but about anthropology, the subject itself, because someone in the comments, I think someone named Mahlobo, mentioned the very idea of, I can't find the thing, of teaching or study, of studying someone is absurd and, enforces a superiority complex. And I'm thinking exactly that. And I'm thinking, how do we then do anthropology differently besides the teaching, but how do we do it differently? And maybe this is an unfair question for you alone, and maybe it goes to the bigger room filled with anthropologists that we have here, that how do we do anthropology in a way that isn't enforcing these superiority complexes, in a way that isn't cultural appropriation, in a way that isn't othering, and sort of like thinking more about how do we study, who do we study, do we study people, do we study with people, how exactly do we do anthropology in a way that it makes sense to remain a relevant discipline in 2021 after all the conversations of decoloniality and considering its history and our colleagues in our universities who have not yet moved with the times. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Machombozi, Stefan, Lovuyo, Hemali, Jabu in the comments. Please keep the comments and hands coming. But I think to not overwhelm Paseka, let's give him a chance to respond, and then we'll have another round. We still have, we're still good on time.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, colleagues. I'm not going to answer questions. I'm just going to speak on things. The first that I'm going to do is just speak on listening. I think in practice, when you say that you want to teach, you cannot teach without learning. We always say that learning is something that is continuous and that is perpetual. You see it every time with supervision. Dr. Van Rijn had always told me that, Karina had always told me that you're always working on your literature review. You are always working because you are always learning. The more you go in, it will never be completed. So for you to be able to listen, you should be able to understand that it's not practical for you to exist without understanding what you are teaching can be problematized and you can improve on it. I'll speak on our honors module. One of the things that we have attempted to do, and I think this is two birds, one stone situation, what we have attempted to do is that we have tried to make students practice anthropology, which they believe is relevant to them. I know it is very complex and it's very, as much as it sounds very simple, but when we encourage students to actually go and study, like you're saying, it's problematic to study people. You're not studying people specifically in the situation, but what is anthropology to you? After we've taken you to a very dark space of what is problematic with anthropology, we encourage you to go out and come with an anthropology which is relevant to you, an anthropology which actually functions for you. Once you are able to do that, you are able to have a reflection, and we also, as the teachers of the module, as the teachers of the module, we are able to have this reflection of how that problematic anthropology has affected you, how you've been able to develop yourself and to move away from these notions of what is good and what is bad, how you've been able to problematize what is anthropology and what you regard as anthropology, and how you can move forward in anthropology. That for me is a meditation, and it's a way of learning, not just for the student, because meditation does not only apply to them, but when you are the person who has to assess this specific student, you are able to also meditate and be able to understand why it's how students function and what you think can be relevant to what you are trying to teach. The same thing that happens with something that is very problematic, that is actually stressing me. Not thinking properly is what Himali was saying about why it's difficult to function in these spaces, because people think that when you speak of things like decoloniality, Pan-Africanism, African scholarship centering the Afrocentric education, you are attacking them. And I did speak to this, but you are not. You are not attacking them. People think that the mere idea of moving away from a way of knowing, from a way of existing, which has been that we've been trying to problematize for all these years, just moving away from it is an attack on you. But in reality, it's not. No one is attacking your way of knowing, your way of existing in this world. But people are just asking to exist. So a lot of people would rather not exist in these spaces, would rather not be in these spaces, because they feel as though this is an effort or an attempt to come at me. And I will be specific with the white male, because if you look at decolonial, actually, if you look at history, we always go back to saying there is a hierarchy of existing. There is the white male, who is the holder of all power. There is the white female, and I'm going to use the simplistic one. There is the white female who has a relationship with the white male, but is not of the same sex nor gender. And I'm using everything loosely here. And then there is the black male who has a relationship with the white male because they are both male, but he is not white. And then there's a black female at the bottom who has no relation whatsoever with this white male at the top. This idea of you holding power and us problematizing everything and coming back and say, but everything that you've been teaching us as the white man has been a problem, has led to a what do you call this? A situation where people think that we are speaking to you directly. I'm not speaking to Stefan. Stefan knows I'm not speaking to him. But I'm saying the ways of knowing which put this way of existing at the very top are problematic to everyone else. And I always say the black women specifically, because they do not share any relationship with this beacon of power and knowledge. So the ways that they've been teaching have no relation in terms of ideology and practice, have no correlation or ways of making the black woman exist in these ways of knowing at all. So that's just me going to that point that Himali was saying, and going into this one of Mahlobo, and it went up. Sorry, let me just quickly do this because Jabu said something. Yeah, she said something about about studying people. I think we can all agree on that. That's just the nature of, that's just the problem of what we are as anthropologists, and why it's so easy to problematize anthropologists. But also, you can study not a people, not people, but study a situation that affects people in an effort to try and help people, not because those people do not need your help, not because from your own perspective, the people are living in an environment which is not acceptable. You know, that's basically you being what the colonizers said. They said, no, we are going to help Africa. We are going to liberate Africa. We are going to improve Africa. You know, that is not that. But what people believe is their problem, how you can offer your specialities as an anthropologist. I'm not saying that, that the whole idea of what is anthropology must just be thrown out. Dr. Radebe is always saying, but we're anthropologists. We need to do anthropology. We need to practice anthropology. We cannot just throw out the kitchen sink and the baby inside the kitchen sink. You can't do that, because what happens is that we need to be able to understand that anthropology does have benefits. If we remove it from these notions of what can be regarded as anthropology, in terms of it having this dichotomy that Jabu has been going back to, if you are able to build a good relationship, and I've seen, like, if you think about some of the dissertations that we've been working with, have been making an effort to move away from these ideas of I'm the researcher, I'm going to research the people, but are trying to resolve problems that the people raise themselves. I know that in practice, we know that some of our research won't even go anywhere. You're lucky if 2 or 3 people read your paper, and that is, I mean, your external examiner, your supervisor, and your second examiner. You're lucky if basically one person who's external reads it. But in practice, if we center problems that we are trying to resolve as anthropologists with our specialities, then we will have a way of anthropology existing, which is not problematic, which is not othering people. So that is just back to that thing of, so how does anthropology exist? So how do we teach anthropology, or how do we do anthropology, to be more specific? Please indicate if I haven't addressed any of the points that were raised.
Fantastic. Okay, I think we have time for a second round of questions and comments. So please feel free to raise your hand. But in that time, whilst we're waiting for respondents, I don't know if it's a question or a comment, an academic adage, but we'll figure it out as we go. But just to share, just this week, I was actually seething with anger because I'm supervising a student who's actually doing a project on Black text, and a white male anthropologist told him to take out the word Black text because it racializes it, right? And it reminded me why I'm also working on a piece, and I've actually titled it "The White Anthropologist as an Intimate Terrorist," and it's a reflective piece on my own experiences, and I'm drawing from Black feminist scholars who've really shown the ways in which, we think about terrorism in terms of the big events, right, 9/11, but sometimes what happens to the kind of intimate terrorists that a lot of us have to encounter in these departments, where there are whole books about Black text, but and people have written whole chapters and scholarship on it, but you're still told, right, that, take off the word Black text because you're racializing this issue. So, but I think the one thing that I guess maybe a little bit of an elephant in the room, right, which is this conversation. One of the things for me that I think I've sort of been able to deal with the whiteness of anthropology, and I'm lucky to have some relative kind of security in a moment that doesn't allow the whiteness to sort of affect my career trajectory. But one of the most painful things I've encountered in the discipline, and of course this is unique in my own individual experience, are the Black gatekeepers, right? Or what I call, or what people with the Black people in anthropology with the one Negro syndrome. So Black gatekeepers who support the kind of violence that whiteness in the discipline perpetuates, particularly on Black students. And I have to say, I was talking to one of my students who's here in the room, and I was saying to him, actually, it made me emotional, that that's the most painful one, when it's actually your own people who are supporting this, because it gives it so much extra legitimacy. And I don't know, I don't have a I don't have a particular comment, but it's just something I've been meditating on, which is how do we also deal with that other dynamic, right, which is so painful and uncomfortable. But it's not now. I mean, the whiteness is certainly there, there's no doubt. Like, I'm in a department, and there are only 2 Black South Africans in a whole department of anthropology, so that itself is telling. But I think I really struggle with this idea of alienation from other Black people as well. But there are 2 hands, so let me just see what's first. La Hoke.
Hello.
Perfect.
Hello,
we can hear
brother.
you.
Yeah. Let me see. Okay. Yeah. So I just wanted to thank my friend Paseka. I saw the email when I woke up, and I said, "What?" I had like 20 minutes, but it is Paseka. So then I stopped everything, and for me to be here, I don't know. He said it's 3 hours. I'm not sure if I will stay till the end, but at least I want to be here for the first hour, and I've been here. So I have a question. I hear a lot about decolonization of like epistemologies of research and many other aspects. I just want to know, how do we decolonize? That's my question. How do we decolonize anthropology? That's my question.
Thank you so much. We have 2 more hands. Dr. Karina?
Thanks a lot. Hi, Paseka. Really lovely listening to you. So I think now your talk has provoked many thoughts in my head, but let me stick maybe to the one. I think one of the things that I personally feel strong about, if we talk about decolonizing anthropology, and for that matter, any of our kind of knowledge areas that we have in universities, is not only that we should talk about what we teach, but also how we teach. And because I think the whole kind of traditional education system has embedded in it the things that you highlighted. The very paternalistic nature of the system is embedded, and that's exactly the things that stop the kind of equal relations that you need for real learning and sharing to happen. So I was wondering whether you have ideas about, if we say we need to decolonize how we teach, so not just the content of, but also the how, and I think it might relate to the previous question as well. What is a different way, and what is a decolonized way of teaching anthropology? Because I think a decolonized way of teaching anthropology will quite likely ensure a decolonized content of anthropology.
Thank you, Karina.
Thank you so much. There's one more hand, and then we'll take one last round after this, because we all know where the position Paseka's been in, so it's quite overwhelming. So we don't want to tire you too much, brother. We know what you're, the kind of work that you're engaged in. So if there's a last burning question or comment, we're gonna have just one last burning round, and then we'll close. So Pilani, and then Paseka can respond.
Mine is not so much of a question, but a response to everybody who's asking about the how do we start to decolonize. Personally, I think it's about really rethinking or finding creative ways to teach and learn and to create knowledge. And particularly, I think what I heard Mapaseka saying is that we need to start thinking about using African ways of thinking as the point of departure. And that in itself will expose the wealth of just knowledge and theorizing that lies in African systems. And two, I think it's about understanding who is the contemporary African student and where are they coming from and how have they been raised. So how do they make sense of the world so that when they walk into your classroom, you know exactly what is their potential, what is their limitations, how do they make sense of this process of knowledge making and negotiating who they are and how they relate to what is taught. So there are people who are doing it. I mean, Gcobani is doing it. I'm sure he can share a bit on his latest book. But there are many ideas that people who are thinking through it, like flipping the classroom, for example. And so walking in there and really renegotiating the power dynamics, then that in itself, I think, is part of decolonizing. And I think what makes it confusing at times is that there are people who've been involved in this kind of work and destabilizing Eurocentric ideas as the center of knowledge making. And so now I think there's a term that is being bestowed to it. And that's what I think confuses people, because then it seems like we're talking about a completely different animal that has never existed.
Thank you so much, Philani. Paseka? And then folks,
Yeah.
just as Paseka responds, sorry, Paseka. As Paseka responds, if you have last burning questions, preferably to be verbalized, please put up your hand in the process, and then we're gonna literally take one last round, and then we're gonna let the brother go rest because he's fighting deep structures here, colonial structures.
No, thank you very much for that, Philani. Thank you very much for that, Karina and Nyaga. Thank you. Nyaga, I think your question, Dr. Nyaka, with Dr. Karina's question, the two interlink. And I'd like to send out a disclaimer that these are my two friends. So their question, I'm not happy with answering it. But how do we practically do it? I think the theoretical frameworks that I've put forward will somewhat try to answer the question, and the theory of how the current relationship in practice of teaching, the whole master and student relationship has been problematized, because what it has done is, and this is me going back to what I was saying, that the whole master and student relationship has been so problematized because what it has done is that it has not allowed other ways of knowing, or it has not been able to answer difficult questions, because once those questions are asked, it's as if they are taking this master or the system that the master functions within. So once they are asked, what they do is that they feel as though they are an attack or an attempt to destabilize this way of knowing and existing in the world. However, if you use Pan-African ideology, if you use Afrocentric ideology, which centers the African, you will understand that it's a matter for one to be able to learn, they should be able to be open to learning, you know. So for us to be able to teach anthropology, we should be able to integrate different ways of knowing. And once you are able to do that, and you do not take this straight line objective approach which says, but this knowledge is wrong, then you are able to change the curriculum itself, and you are able to change the subject itself of anthropology if we are using the specific context of anthropology. In that way, already you are moving from Western Eurocentric ways of knowing, which want to say objectively, this is the only right way to exist. Ngugi, as Karina was just touching on, decentering and recentering, what he's done brilliantly is that he says, I've taken an approach where I'm going to exist as I am. Ngugi wa Thiong'o said, I exist as I am, and I will not falsify myself. And how has he done this? He has taken his language and has decided that this is going to be my approach to learning, to teaching, to existing in the world. And the student, because there's so much in the language, you know, there are some things that you can say in, like in English, that when you say in your language, it just brings out these complexities of what you're trying to explain. And all of that gets lost, especially when you are someone who is not a first language English speaker like myself specifically. So once you are able to start centering your language also in teaching, then there are these ideas of how you exist in the world that can start speaking out for themselves, you know. So that is an approach that I believe we should be open to. And also Vuyo has touched on something that is very important, that I think all of us have. Those are the first things when you start to learn about, you can center African, you can center the Afro, you can decolonize a module, that we started to problematize the Malinowskis, the Boerses, you know, of this world. Then you start to look at where these people come from, you know, where these fathers basically of anthropology come from. What culture do they share? What history do they share? What ideas have they put forward? Some of them might be contradicting each other, but some of them you start seeing that they all want to suppress other ways of existing in the world. They try to make them as small as they possibly can. They minimize their impact in the world. Now, you do not understand from an African's approach how people can exist in the world. Once you center that way of knowing, the other way of knowing, which scholars like Mafeja have tried to speak on, Ngugi has tried to speak on, Professor Ramosi, you know, and I'm speaking about relatively recent people who still exist. Once you move away from these other ways of existing, and you try to center that Eurocentric approach, Western approach to understanding and existing in the world, you find yourself with these problems that we currently have. I think my problem is always, and I've had this debate with Nyaka, we started having it in 2018 about what do you call this? Afrocentric, Pan-Africanism, decolonization, because, you know, if you follow these politics, you'll notice the politics of this one cannot exist in this context. You cannot decolonize in Africa because this was a movement that was started here and there. But my thing is that moving away from terminology, it's important for us to understand that the most important thing that we must all agree on as people who are trying to fight a system is that we exist within a problematic system, a fundamentally problematic system. And the only way we are going to move away from that is either we center ourselves. And how do we center ourselves? We center ourselves by decolonizing. And now what I'm saying when I say we center ourselves, I'm using the Afrocentric approach or the Pan-African approach. And how do you, and once you've done that, then you decolonize. So the two can actually exist. You know, the two can actually exist, or the three can actually exist as ways of existing. What matters is that you need not fight within, you know, what you need to fight is this oppressive system that we are currently trying to address here. And that was just me touching on something that's very close to my heart that I find is holding back what we are trying to do. But in practice, it's important that we do not stop ourselves or limit ourselves to these boxes that I spoke of trying to destabilize a problematic system using the tools that are offered to us. But you should be able to say, okay, but what is anthropology? You need to understand the colonial process, and which is something you understand, I'm sorry for that, but we need to be cognizant that we need to remember the fact that the colonial system of existing, what we deem as colonial education, is not something that happened over a short period of time. This is something that happened over multiple years. It happened years and years and years. You fell and then you rose. You made a mistake and then you fixed it. For you to have this perfect system that has been able to convince people cross-generationally that they are inferior, That was not done overnight. It was a build-up. So what I'm saying is that for us to be able to do this in practice, we must not be afraid to fail. I know it's difficult, especially within the context and the institutions that we find ourselves in, that if you fail, you feel like you will lose your job, you know, and it's easy for you to be attacked once you try to use a different approach. It's easy for you to be disciplined when you're using a different approach, you know. So, but you need to be able to remember that this entire process, this system that we're trying to break, which is problematic, that students have been making problematic, that we have also been able to be cognizant and to acknowledge that is problematic, didn't just exist overnight. It had to be fixed over multiple years. I see Andile has his hand up. Brother Andy. Gcobani, you are mute.
No, Dr. A can go. Dr. A, is that you?
Andile, you're on mute.
How's it now? It should be
Yeah,
fine.
we can hear you now.
Yeah, how's it, man?
I'm
Good to
good,
see
brother.
you,
How are
man.
you? It's
Not
nice
too
to
bad.
see you, Dr. A.
Yeah, same here, man. Thank you very much for availing yourself, with really putting yourself out there to be scrutinized, because it's not easy. It's not easy to put yourself in this position to really show your own positionality on these issues. So I think it was brave of you to do this. I just wanted to share like something, because this topic is really touching deep down to a lot of us in the anthropology department. Like Qambela alluded to this issue earlier. In our department, we had a few years back a student who came from Africa, one of the African countries, to present a doctoral a proposal in the department. And it was sad for me to see a student being attacked in that way. Like, it was not even about the proposal. You could see that these people just wanted to block an excellent proposal. They just wanted the student not to register in our university. And I'm the only one who stood up and defended that proposal. At that time, proposals were still sent to faculty for approval. And the feedback we got from the faculty is that that was one of the best proposals they've seen coming from our department. When I mean, here I'm just making reference to the white man you spoke about earlier. And the sad part about this, I mean, I'm not even ashamed to say this. The sad part about this, the same people was the same person who was really at the forefront of that attack. When the student was about to submit his PhD thesis, for some reason, his name is now on the thesis. For a thesis he has never even read, let alone the abstract. He doesn't know anything about that thesis. But his name, because he's that a person, he must get the credit for a student he has never supervised. It's really sickening to be in this position as Black academics. Like Qambela was saying, a student is being attacked for using a certain phrase. So it's sad. It's sad. There's often an implicit and hidden assumption that academics, one, they know and understand what decolonization is all about, what is expected of them, and that they all have a singular and monolithic a conception of achieving decolonial aims. So it's frustrating, but I think it is these kinds of engagement and conversations that we need to have. Like Hemali mentioned earlier, that the people who are in this room, they say a lot about the positionality of a lot of our academics in the anthropology department. So well done, man, for availing yourself and really taking this on. Best of luck, yeah, in your chapter.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. A. Lahoge? I don't know if that was a mistake or not, but Lahoge, are you there?
1 second. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh yeah, yeah. I know. It's a question. Just another question for Paseka. It's certainly not related to his research, but I understand African thinkers and researchers because of the history that we have. We have experienced slavery, apartheid, colonialism, neocolonialism. That everything that we want to do has to be about Afrocentricity, recentering African epistemologies. But I have a question. Do you think that African anthropologists should think about studying other cultures and civilizations beside the African civilization? In other words, do you think that it will make sense for African anthropologists to go and study white people? The same thing that they did, and by saying things like from a racist perspective. I'm not saying that we should do that from a racist perspective, but do you think that it would make sense for African anthropologists? That's my question.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, I think that was the. Sorry?
Just before you go, I think there are two important comments that are really worth reading out as you prepare your response. And the first one says, I think the first step, I think this was Jabu, I think the first step to decolonize is to live with the people and not to study people. Much of our history worldwide was characterized by colonization, stemming from the idea of studying people, which resulted in oppression and slavery. We also need to ask ourselves why. Why are we studying people? Who are we to study, and why, and what is wrong with them so much that we need to study them? I think the big issue here is ideologies that are being recreated over time and presented in different terms. I think this studying of people, quote unquote, is an ideology on its own that needs to be dealt with. So that's Rujabu. And then Uluvuyo writes, I think the fundamental problem of anthropology is that its practitioners still hold on to its historical monumental achievements of nothingness, and that has not evolved. We still have gatekeepers who cannot accept the changing dynamics of the world and the need for anthropology to adapt to such changes. So how can we then decolonize anthropology so that it benefits us, those who have been previously disadvantaged? Throughout my undergrad years, I was taught about the likes of Malinowski, Boas, Geertz, and the likes of Shepherd Hughes, and nothing on Black anthropology scholars as Nafeje. These are the things that need to be looked at if we are to decolonize the field. I thought that was important to read out for now.
Yes, Luvuyo's point, I think I did touch on it previously because I did see the comment. Jabu's comment, I totally agree, Jabu. The problem is that we've placed this, and I think I did touch on it also before the questions that we're just chatting on right now. I think we've placed this, put ourselves on this pedestal that you have the right to study. Mpo, who is a colleague of mine, was doing her master's research a few years ago, and she said to me, you know, Paseka, one of the most interesting questions that I had was I went to do my research. She's an archaeologist. She says, and one of the people asked me that, but why are you the professor? Why do you have this pedestal when all the knowledge you're looking for is coming from me? You know, so it brings this conflict into existence, where now you're trying to understand, why do we have this pedestal? Why do we exist to study these people? And Jabu answers the same question that she actually highlights, that you need to exist with people, not study them, People are not there to be studied. And as I said, you need to work on solving people's problems, not that the ones that you've developed, that you've problematized, but the problems that people have. And you, if you have the ability to, you must be able to do research, or you must be able to publish and do work that is supposed to benefit them as the group that needs to, as the group that you are working with, not studying. I think those are very important things. And as I said, with Luvuyo, I think I've just touched on that right now. And let me see. Yeah, I think that's a point that I had just touched a few minutes ago. So let me see. You said, Dr. Nyaga said, would it be useful to go and study people? Yeah, no, you know, I think...
No, white people.
Pardon?
To study white people.
White people, yes, brother. You know, I think, I don't know, you see, and this one is a question that I've had. I just don't, like what Jabu has been saying, I just don't get the notion of actually studying people. What do you benefit? What makes, you know, like what makes us better to be able to study people? What's so interesting about people? The thing is, should be studying problems and resolving them. You know, I don't know if that makes sense. We must be able not to study people, but to resolve problems in the research that we do. So if we go and we study white people, we will have these questions that need to be answered. Why do these people feel comfortable to be racist online? You know, like I'm a big sports fan, and a number of you might know, and I follow it a lot. You see, like I'll give you an example. Recently, with the European championships, the Euros, England lost, and 3 black players missed. Their best players, 3 young black boys missed. The amount of racism that came out of those English people. But here's the interesting thing, and this is going to touch on what Nyaka has just asked. The interesting thing is that the British were the ones who, the English specifically, were the ones who lost that game because the 3 black boys missed. And they were the racism that came out from that match was just disgusting. But we know that it can't be hidden. It exists, you know. One of the funny things that they said was these were comments actually that were coming outside of England. Why would I be so angry in South Africa that Rashford missed the penalty for England? Why would someone in China be so angry that Sancho missed the penalty? You know, like what I'm getting at is this ability by the Europeans to, and specifically the English, to move themselves away from the problems that they've created from this racism. Now, when you think about, I'm going to give you a funny example, and we see it all the time. In South Africa, we have these racial tensions, like these hectic racial tensions. You ask a black person, who is a racist? The first person that they're going to take out, the first person that they're going to think about, and this is just me, like from observations and, you know, just existing in this space. The first person that you think about is the Afrikaner. Somehow we've been able to remove the English who implemented the first system of segregation before apartheid, and who also benefited from the system of apartheid. Remove them totally from the discourse and from the problems, but highlight the first people, the Afrikaner. You know, this is what you see even to this day in time, especially in the realm of sports, in the reality of sport, whereby the English have been able to manipulate the way that we conceptualize what is racist, what is racism, and remove themselves from the discussion and try to highlight how other Eastern European countries can be so problematic and can be so racist. If we are going to study problems like that, I believe we can go and problematize those issues. You know, if we are going to problematize how these people have been able to remove themselves, one of the biggest colonizers in the world, one of the most problematic countries, if not the most problematic, the one that colonized the most countries in the world, is able to remove himself from this ideas of what is problematic, the ideas of racism, of colonialism, of, you know, of what you call slavery, remove themselves from that. But until this day, we can still see those breadcrumbs or those signs of their history in their own system, their own functioning system. If we go to have this engagement, if we go, and referring back to Brother Nyaka, if we go and problematize these issues, then let's go. That's what I think. Then let's go, because now you can't always play hide and seek while you are the one who's benefiting from these broken systems that you've set in place. I thank you.
Oh my goodness, I can't imagine what's going on in your head now, because we've all been there and there's so much fire. But we are getting to the close now, so that we can really give you some time to also rest. But I think the point also that Dr. Machombozi raised in the comments around our citation practices, right, is so important. And this is something that someone like Professor Sakum Zimfekane at DWC has also raised, that often, even as Black scholars, we often don't cite and engage each other's work. There were about nearly 40 people coming in and out during the past 2 hours of this session. Imagine if each and one of those persons cited you. You know, you have 4 new citations. I saw some of my undergrads here. I'm currently teaching a course on ethnography, and this will likely be one of their exam questions, and they have to watch this video and engage these issues. So there are a lot of things that we can do in order to really start thinking about how do we also circulate our work. And I've done it before. So my PhD, I never cited any of the quote unquote classical scholars, and I'm not bragging, but my PhD was passed with no corrections. So it is possible to actually do it. It's possible to do work that doesn't really always continuously reproduce and recenter everything that we've been discussing here. I just wanted to read some comments. I think was a comment by Dr. Machombozi around the importance of citations. And then Jabu wrote, we are currently faced with so much as Black people. The problem now is the system and the deeply entrenched ideologies that continue to haunt us as Black people. Double the trouble when you're a woman of color. I doubt we need to study white people. We need to challenge the system. Dr. Machombozi wrote that just a note, works by Francis Nyamjo and also Mwenda Ntarangwi grapple with some of these issues we have discussed here today. She continues to write, I think there is enough room for different types of anthropologists, for practical anthropologists who are interested in solving problems and coming up with solutions and such, but there is also room for anthropologists who are studying systems and learning about the different ways of being in this world. And then the last comment, and we have to close. And so your response, you can also close us out. He writes that, not sure if this will be the space, so if there will be space in this conversation for this, but in what ways can we provide support for meaningful transformation to each other as colleagues? I think the situation at UNISA is slightly different as compared to the challenges faced by colleagues at other universities. This platform where we interact with each other is one opportunity for support, but there are other ways to think through possibilities for transformative action. I can hear the struggles faced by colleagues to the point of affecting their work. So I think, Paseka, you can just also not just reflect, of course, on these comments, but also just start to think about, what do you want us to take away from your talk today? And I just want to say, on behalf of Gauteng Anthropology, you've given us so much with this provocation, and I just want to also say publicly that we don't underestimate the risk that often comes with raising these kinds of conversations, because when we apply for jobs and we apply for promotions, we know who sits on those and on those deciding chairs. So thank you so much. And I wanted to just close my sort of moderation side by saying my 2 favorite definitions of decolonization is, number 1, I think I learned this via Professor Ntabiseng Motsheme, who writes about decolonization in 2 ways. Number 1 is the struggle against alienation, right? So you never feel alone in the academy, even with all of these issues that we grapple with in anthropology. But it's also a new way of seeing things. And I think you've given us so much that is rich in your presentation around new ways of thinking, new ways of doing. How do we conceptualize our thoughts? How do we center students and so on? So on behalf of anthropology, I just want to say thank you so much for raising this brave conversation. And I can't wait for your chapter to be out so that we can cite it and blast it and circulate it to the world.
Thank you very much, Tovan. I really appreciate that. The 2 last comments by, I think it was Stefan and Majambozi. Those are not questions. I think those are speaking points, speaking to each other, and very important points that I really enjoy. And Stefan did say something. Stefan was basically saying we need a support group because clearly colleagues are going through a lot in their spaces. So I believe that these are things that we should be able to do by. When I was still in undergrad, there was this relationship that I think one of the reasons I ended up being in anthropology, that the anthropologist teachers, the anthropology teachers had. It was brilliant to watch. They had such a good chemistry. They'll always have their own problems, you know how it is. But the relationship between the people who would come and teach us, like my previous boss, who Dr. Ingrid Marie, who would be an external but still come to UNISA to teach. She was an external, imagine at the time, and still be able to come. The relationship that she had cultivated with the likes of Dr. Van Rooyen, the likes of Prof. Thea, Himalis, you know, Alice, there was this relationship of support that existed there, which is difficult to see in many spaces. Once people can be able to exist and allow each other to exist in spaces, Himali also touched on this a very long time ago, you know, like I was still a junior at the time, about how she comes as she is and she needs people to understand that she's in that space as she is herself and doesn't need to leave herself at home. Then we will be able to attack some of the problems that multiple colleagues have been going back and forth on, about the oppressive nature of some of the environments that they find themselves working in. I think this is just a comment from my side, how we can offer each other support. Honestly, just get friends. Just get friends within your space, and it can also be externally. And I think I didn't know Gcobani until we had Gauteng Anthropology, and then we kicked it off. You already have a support base. Me and Andy, and I'm speaking about specifically anthropologists, me and Andy built a very decent rapport with each other over time. So that, you know, you can, I don't know, that's just me touching on what I think about the support that we can offer each other. And Karina did ask a question, which was a question about how, so is there anything that we can use as basically a blueprint for what is a decolonized anthropology that we can say this is it? At this point, I'm honestly going to say I don't think there is, unless, I don't know, we just need to go through other universities for us to find the answer to this. But what we have is we have part of the blueprint from different individuals that we should be able, and specifically I think as Gauteng Anthropology, we will find a lot of challenges. I mean, I went and I was telling you guys about the meeting that we had where a colleague said that students don't know what they're looking for. You know, we will find those things, but a movement like this, especially with the very confident people that I've seen ourselves I've seen within this space, a movement like this should be able to give us a full blueprint by taking from spaces or from different places for us to have a system that we say, you know what, this we think can work. And as I said, colonial education, colonial curriculum was not built in one day. It took many years. It collapsed. They rebuilt until they were able to convince the black child that your ways of existing in this world are problematic. So if you are able to convince someone that they are not worthy of existing, they are not good enough, their identity, their being is problematic, then you've mastered the system. That took years to do. So we should be kind to ourselves. It's difficult, but we should work. We should be kind to ourselves. We should be able to say, you know what, we will just continue working. Prof. Tandai has always spoken about this, that one of our problems is that we are just not doing enough. We are just not working. You know, like we are not writing enough. Once you start writing, once we try to make sure, like, I like this thing, cite black. Once you start citing black, then you'll be able to take out this knowledge to the world, where now we do not have to deal with these very childish and with racist undertone questions of, okay, but how do we do it? Okay, but those questions are very childish and they do not want to go forward. They clearly make sure that their aim is to catch you out in whatever you're trying to do, or to try and problematize what you're trying to do. Those questions do not come from a point of someone who's trying to learn, but come from a point of someone who's trying to just delay you. Then we shouldn't be able to struggle with those questions once we've taken these knowledges and we've put them out there. I don't know. I don't think there is something else. Yeah, I think that I will close. Let me see. Yeah, I will close from my end by thanking you, thanking everyone for being here. I think we're supposed to be long done. I'm not sure, but what I want to do is really thank you. I really appreciate everyone who came through. You guys have been brilliant, and this has been a very engaging discussion. I'm still working. I was supposed to be done, but I've gone through a period of trauma, so I'm still trying to fix myself and function as I should. And then maybe I'll have it sorted soon, and I should be able to publish this chapter soon. Colleagues, I thank you very much, and I'm closing from my side. And honestly, thank you so much for being here and for engaging. These are not conversations that make people feel comfortable. You know, these are not conversations that make you feel comfortable. Not just white people. Like, I've seen black people say they cringe. You know that feeling when you cringe when someone starts speaking about these conversations, but we are able to have them so freely and so openly. I really appreciate that. I don't know. I think we can close if everyone is happy. I don't know if there's still a question happening there. I think everyone who needs to leave can leave, and then the discussion there can continue there on that thing. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.